Is it?
Looks good.
You get a signal?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. All right, how's it going, everyone? Welcome. So we'll do a little practice, and maybe have a little break, and then slogan from the Lojong that Chandra's been doing. So we can just take a second to come into the room together. So let's just spend a minute or so just noticing any tension in our bodies from the day. Any lingering emotional content or thought processes that may have been repeating throughout the day, our reactions to both positive and maybe not so positive things in our workday or just average Wednesday afternoon. So here we're just taking a second to bring awareness to and be mindful of whatever we're experiencing. And we don't have to do anything with it. Just noticing, being aware. The compassion here is our ability to just bear witness to what we're experiencing, whatever it is. And if it's painful or overwhelming in any kind of way, I just invite you to bring a possible loving awareness there. And perhaps we can connect in whatever we're experiencing with others, remembering that those around us throughout the day, as well as just strangers we walk by, are also going through their own ups and downs. And possibly we could hold them in our heart a little bit. And just expand that slowly, including our loved ones. And eventually including those we dislike. And by including those we dislike, we don't have to respect or like what they do, necessarily, especially the things that maybe caused us not to like them. But we just bring in the understanding that they also want happiness. They want to avoid pain. And so in our motivation to practice and engage with the dharma tonight, we include them in our circle with all sentient beings. Sentience here meaning any being that has awareness and is alive. So we practice not just for ourselves, but for all of them. And then with this motivation, we can begin the practice of samadhi, just watching the breath. And you can bring your awareness to the breath as it enters and exits your nose. or possibly feeling your belly as it expands and contracts. Or wherever you place your attention, just bring your awareness to the breath and how it's interacting with your body. And just simply be with that. Not in some rigid, heavy way, but in a very relaxed way. And of course, when our attention wavers or we get caught in a sound, a thought, or an emotion, just for the next 20, 25 minutes, we just gently bring our attention back to the breath each time we become distracted. And this is really our job, our only job for the next 20 or 25 minutes. All right, so maybe we'll take a short break, 5 or so minutes. If you need to use the bathroom or grab tea, then we'll get into the slogan for tonight.
Did you see this? in the New Yorker.
1920. What is it? Oh, the cartoon? No. That's pretty good. I like that.
Meditate on that.
Must be a secret Buddhist as one of the cartoonists.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so maybe we'll get started. Just if it's okay with all you, maybe if we can condense in. I feel like we're kind of ants spread out all over the place. Just feel free to come in. Hopefully your person you're sitting next to showered today. I'm pretty sure they probably did. All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Okay? Yeah? So for those who don't know me, my name's Scott. I'm subbing for Chandra tonight. I think she'll be back next week, I'm pretty sure she'll be back next week. And so usually when I've subbed for her, I just continue on with wherever she left off in the 7-point mind training text that we've been doing. How many people here have been kind of like regularly coming? Yeah, a couple? Okay. So usually what I like to do, just because there's usually a couple of new people in the room, is I'll just recap a little bit what we're doing. So Lojong is the Tibetan word for mind training. And basically, generally, like, mind training could really apply to any kind of practice in Buddhism. But more specifically in Tibetan Buddhism, it refers to a corpus of teachings called like Lojong teachings. And they're focused on sort of both the practices of what we call ultimate bodhicitta, which is more working with how appearance and reality can be reconciled, and relative bodhicitta. And I would say they're a little bit more there's more of an emphasis on relative bodhicitta. And bodhicitta just basically is a Sanskrit word meaning the mind of awakening. And so it's the mind working towards enlightenment in its relative and ultimate aspects. So in its relative aspects, it expresses itself in sort of methods and practices of working with loving kindness and compassion, working with any skillful means that would transform our minds, like lessen our self-grasping, lessen ego clinging, and sort of widen our ability to reach out towards others with more compassion, selflessness, loving kindness. So that's sort of all the practices. It's a short way to encapsulate what the practices of relative bodhicitta are. So of course, within the Theravada tradition, what mostly people are accessing here at Against the Stream, metta practices, things like that, right? So Lojong is this corpus of teachings coming from, mainly was brought into Tibet by an Indian master named Atisha. And he brought these in as sort of ways to train the mind in certain slogans, certain ways of thinking that will eventually affect how we act and we live in the world. And trying to transform them, basically, they're a little bit more, some of them are more direct than others. And the direct ones are really, the point is to actually challenge our stance in the world that we are the most important one. so it's very challenging practices. So what I was just thinking about while we were practicing when I was supposed to be meditating was that when we've come to a place in ourselves where there's room and space to completely feel whatever is coming up for us without having to reject our experience, without having to build further like reification and fencing around our experience to protect ourselves from it. Does that make sense? Yeah? So any kind of difficult emotions that are coming up, difficult ways of trauma that's coming up, once we've resolved that, and I don't mean resolved meaning we never feel anything ever again and we're completely blissed out all the time. That's not what I mean by resolved. Resolved means here that we've resolved that we have the willingness to sit with our own pain, to sit with our own dissatisfaction, right? So once that's kind of happening for us and moving along, which isn't a point, it's not like, oh, I'm here and now have well-being. It's a process we're always engaged in. So it's that resolve or willingness to feel is how I like to say it. Yeah. And this is not an easy job for us. I find culturally, it hasn't been an easy job for me personally, as I was conditioned most of my life not to feel. So maybe some of us in the room have also had that experience. So when that's been resolved to a certain extent and we're willing to sit with our own pain, then what we can start to bring in is empathy and being able to bear witness more and more to the pain of others and being able to bring that into our practice. So Lojong is really working with this second way, right? It's already assuming that we've resolved the first thing, meaning we're willing to sit with our own suffering. So for a lot of us, I think the job, our main job for a while is just building that resilience to be able to sit with our own pain, with our own suffering. And as I'm sure everyone in the room can attest to, this is not, like I said already, this is not an easy thing nowadays, especially we're inundated with so much sensory experience. For me personally, I feel that it's the overload of sensory experience that often kind of triggers the nervous system into like an overload kind of experience, where if I end up scrolling Facebook more than 4 or 5 times a day, it's guaranteed I will be overloaded, right? Because somehow we don't thrive. News media does not thrive on good news, right? So, anyways, so with that said, this is essentially what we're working with in Lojong. Lojong can also be the main way to talk about it is really we're working with exchanging ourselves for others. So, like I said, this is on the basis of first the feeling. I'm not going to say the understanding, but the actual feeling that we're worthy, that we're valuable, that we are worthy of love. So once that's happening, that's another way to say that first kind of resolution I was talking about. Once that's happening, then Lojong can come in where we can start to actually exchange ourselves with others and use that to further transform the clinging that often binds us to our suffering, right? So here the premise is that the more we cling to our own happiness, actually the less happy we are. So Lojong is one of the remedies within Indian Buddhism to do that, to work with that. And primarily, like I said, it's been sort of held for thousands of years, or I should say, yeah, a little more than 1,000 years in Tibet. When Buddhism was wiped out in India, Lojong teachings were also wiped out. So they kind of were preserved in Tibet. So the reason I'm premising it like that is that this is I feel, and when I've received these teachings from Tibetan teachers who are culturally sensitive to what many Americans go through and many Westerners, the consensus is that the first step is this first resolution I was talking about. A lot of cultures that are more indigenous cultures, I consider Tibetan culture an indigenous culture in Tibet. More indigenous cultures often, due to other factors, being more communal, having less individualism, more well-being generally, although this is starting to change, obviously, as capitalism and other systems affect everywhere. They generally had a sense of well-being. Now that's a generalization, but it's generally was there, and is there. And so often for us, we just have this preliminary of first working with becoming lovable, is one way I like to put it, you know. And some of us, again, due to our cultural upbringing and the diversity in America, might not have this issue. We might have grown up in a circumstance that was more, provided that for us, right? So anyways, so with that said, just getting into the slogan for tonight. So last week we went over, we're kind of getting to the end of the text now. So last week we had this slogan, to pay heed that the three never wane, right? And so and then that was number 46. Now today is number 47, which is keep the three inseparable. So just to make it more confusing, there are 2 different sets of 3 they're talking about here, right? So somebody asked last week, is it the same set of 3? And I said no. So Tibetans like numbers for some reason. So these phrases are kind of like that, yeah? And like I pointed out last week, these phrases are kind of, they're hidden phrases. They're meant to be a little bit secretive, so they have to be unpacked. by someone with the lineage, right? So they were also secret when they were originally taught. They weren't, and one way I'm kind of confounded because they're not that, I mean, these are many of these things within these slogans we come into contact with in modern times, but I wonder, 1,000, 1,400 years ago, maybe this was very secretive things, meaning like not a lot of people could practice this, so they kept it more, and it was an oral tradition too, right? So it was passed from teacher to student like that. So anyways, verse 47, it's pretty straightforward. So keep the three inseparable. So this is in relationship, because now we're in these what's like a section called the guidelines of mind training, because the main part of the text has already been taught by Chandra. So now we're in this section where these are really guidelines for then how to work with the main practice. So I'll go over the main practice a little bit. The main practice, if we sum up all of this, is exchanging oneself with others, right? And we can do that through Tonglen practice. We can do that through other means. But in general, now it's saying like, okay, well, what do you do then to keep that practice continuous? So in verse 47, it's keeping the three inseparable. So this is basically saying that our practice of Lojong should be wholehearted and complete, and that the body and speech and mind should come together and be inseparable from Lojong, right? So often in Mahayana Buddhism, body, speech, and mind are talked about a lot, yeah? So, like I already said, Lojong is really this space or ground of transformation and exchanging oneself with others. So based off of first this ground of well-being, then of course, even within that well-being, we still have a ego-centered existence. So then within the Buddhist teachings, it's looking into, is that serving our best interests? We don't even have to, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that doesn't serve others' interest as much. I don't think we have to like go into that, but often there's a lot of confusion of like, is that serving my interest? Is that making me more happy? Is it making, another way to say this is like in our extremely hyper-material culture, are we becoming more happy the more shit we get and stuff in our garage, So these kinds of teachings are asking us to investigate that. Not to fundamentally undermine like stuff, like there's not a problem with stuff. It's all about our relationship to it and our relationship to how we hold ourselves in the world and hold our stance and how that is functioning in relationship with others, right? So this is something we each have to explore. Like I don't put this on you as a dogma or anything like that. This is something we each have to explore and see, is it working out for me to be really preoccupied with myself? And I'll tell you, like, I probably have like 500 thoughts or more, thousands of thoughts a day about myself in relationship to a stoplight, in relationship to the burrito I just ate, in relationship to like tonight's teaching or what I'm going to do tomorrow or whatever. And when usually I forget this teaching. But when I really reflect on this kind of teaching of exchanging myself for others, I start to realize, oh wow, yeah, it's not really serving me. This is my own answer, a conclusion I've come to through investigation, right? It's not really serving me. The more I focus on myself, the more I become preoccupied and obsessed with myself, the more I feel bound, because it's never ending. It's just like, I want one thing after another, after another. It's not good enough to, do this thing. Then I have to add more to it, Earning this amount of money isn't enough. I need more. So there's always these consequences from that, yeah? And then the other premise is, so if we begin to, as a meditator with this kind of practice, we start by just doing it with our mind. This is why we're going to start talking about body, speech, and mind here. But we start with the mind. We start by engaging in just the notion of a simple metta practice can be a practice of Lojong, of just wishing love, wishing happiness, wishing care, wishing health and well-being on someone else. That can be a very simple way of practicing Lojong, because automatically we're starting to exchange our own preoccupation with self with the preoccupation of another, right? Now this is tricky because sometimes I think in our culture we have a sense that like unless there's a material value to something or there's an action that it's not worthwhile. And with this kind of practice, it starts with the aspiration. It starts with the thinking mind. It starts with the mind sort of transforming how we're approaching a situation in thought and emotional intention and all of that. Then the sort of premise is that then that will result in a more sustaining compassion and loving kindness. Where when it's based off of a material value point, now this is my opinion, right? And you all can explore it. I feel in the world when it's based off of a result like a commodity-driven experience, it's very limited, because then it's like, it sort of is like, okay, I did this one nice thing, like give $1 to, you know, a guy asking me walking down the street, so I have permission the rest of the day to be a total selfish asshole. You know, this is how I usually look at it. You know, I'm not saying you do, but you know, hopefully you don't. But often it's kind of like that good boy kind of like, you know, pat on the back kind of culture, right? So again, this is a result, my shitty opinion, but this is a result also of losing relationality more and more, and the culture being hyper-individual, right? So anyways, so we have to have, these methods can be really skillful as correctives for us. So premise of Buddha Dharma as a whole is like to first not do harm. That's the first premise, is to first refrain ourselves from doing something with our body, speech, and mind that's harmful to another, that's going to cause them suffering, pain, any kind of dissatisfaction, right? And I would say, of course, we can start with ourselves. First trying to not to do harm to ourselves, and then making that relational in connection with others, yeah? And then after that, once we're sort of used to not doing harm, which I'm sure most of you in the room, or all of you, are pretty comfortable with that, then we try to benefit if we can, right? So I had this question as I was thinking about this verse today, because there wasn't much in the commentary. So it was like, okay, this is either going to be a 5-minute teaching or, you know, I'm going to sort of break this out of the box a little bit. So I had this question. So what is mind training from the perspective of body, speech, and mind? And in particular, I've been kind of in a very melancholy mood today. And so I often, for me, when that's happening, I have to go to my body. I have to bring my awareness, attention, and experience to that. I can't use the thinking mind to figure it out, because the thinking mind has no fucking clue what you know, my body is experiencing. So I had this, I think it's Rumi's fault, because I was sitting in this cafe and there's like a pocket Rumi book. So I started picking that up, and then suddenly I'm in all these weird metaphors. But anyway, actually I think I'm going to read this Rumi thing. It was kind of interesting, because you ever take a book and you just like flip it and then just stop on a page, right? Actually, maybe I'll start with this. Let's see, I tell you, like, I'm getting more New Age by the moment. But even though Rumi is not New Age, Rumi is actually quite beautiful. So, so this is what came up. I flipped the book, and you know, I was reflecting on this aspect of mind training in the context of body, speech, and mind. Especially, like I said, I was thinking about more the body, because I feel like for me, my conditioning and culture, coming from more like a white dominant culture, which I experience as a vacuum. It's like a vacuous thing that doesn't have a culture. It's taught me not to be in my body. It's taught me to be in my head primarily, and with more logical thinking and cognitive thinking. So for me, a corrective that I'm doing often is getting into my body as much as possible and trying to find some wisdom, or trying to find some wisdom from the body itself, from the feeling, which includes intuition and all that too. So then I picked up Rumi, and so this is what it says. The poem, this particular poem of Rumi, is called Essence and Form. So it says, the word is like the nest, and meaning is the bird. The body is the riverbed, and spirit the rolling water. It's so short, I'll read it one more time. I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but but it includes body, speech, and mind. That's why I was kind of blown away, you know. So I'll read it slow. The word is like the nest, and meaning is the bird. the body is the riverbed, and spirit, the rolling water. Quite beautiful, yeah? So, I was thinking based off this, like the body as soil, as sort of the ground, right?
What did he say the body is? The nest?
That was speech, but I'll go back to it. Hold on.
The word is the nest.
The body is the riverbed.
Oh, the body is the riverbed.
Yeah. And then spirit, he's using the term spirit to represent everything that's not body and speech. So maybe we could say, like in Buddhism, we would call that mind. And spirit, the rolling water. Yeah. That's a deep one. I'd have to, like I said, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm sure there's some Rumi heads out there do. I have a friend who's really into Rumi. So I was thinking of this, like the body as soil. And soil, because soil is the basis and ground for reaction, process, growth. It's one of the interdependent factors in sort of life, right? And I was really reflecting on, again, like how, okay, then in this, how do we hold our bodies with dharma, right? So just think about that for a second and let that sit with you. How to hold dharma in the body. Actually, does anybody have anything? What does that trigger for you? Just without thinking so much.
What it triggers for me is what you were saying earlier, is the ability to bring awareness to body sensations and how the body is moment by moment changing billions and billions of cells or whatever, creation and deterioration. That's way too conceptual. But to actually feel the physical body.
Mm-hmm. So feeling is feeling.
Being aware of feeling. And I would say maybe not just the soil, but the whole earth.
Mm-hmm.
The body is the whole earth, including the riverbed.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
So it's meant to treat your body with loving kindness.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little on that?
Just that the whole body is your temple, kind of.
Yeah.
That's what popped into my head. Just don't just treat others and think of others, but actually treat your body well.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I experience a lot of negative stuff comes from my body, fear, anxiety, tiredness. And it's really hard not to push that stuff away. I tend to push it away, go forget it, go do something else, rather than allow myself to feel it. It's very hard. That's what I experience.
Yeah, it is hard. Yeah. Yeah. So
Stuff that arises in the body is powerful.
So that's part of holding the dharma in the body is bearing witness, like I said earlier, something like that. Yeah.
But that's letting it be rather
Yeah.
than pushing it away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think of bearing witness as that. It is letting it be, because pushing, suppressing or pushing something away is not bearing witness. It's actually like rejecting. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
It really kind of means like listening to the body, holding the truth in the body, as opposed to just being in the mind. So kind of just another way to say what we've been saying. But I think about like natural instincts, like fear and anxiety and blood rushing and the heat and the sensations that you get when I get emotions, and to think about it or to try to hold the truth in those emotions. To watch it from a body perspective as opposed to listening to the mind as the truth, because I think we can all be clear that that's not the case a lot of times, especially when it comes to emotions. For me,
Yeah.
the story gets told. It doesn't. The truth for me is more in the like, oh, I feel that anxiety here, or I feel that anger here, or I feel that melancholy here.
So it's part of like dropping the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to get a little more the dharma.
wonderful. Yeah. Anyone else? Maybe one or two more.
It's,
Maybe someone who hasn't said something. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, just see if anyone else. Yeah, Molly.
Flashing back to a talk that another teacher gave a number of years ago, and this idea of how do I respond to everything that's going on right now, body and mind and heart, in a way that improves my well-being and the well-being of others.
Yep.
And for me, like sometimes it's just like that quiet acknowledging of like, oh, my heart rate just spiked 50 points. I'm feeling a little anxious. And kind of sending a little bit of like understanding to that, or touching in on the part of me that cares. And then responding rather than reacting.
Yeah.
In a way that matches values.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. That actually ties into one of the reflections I had, just a little note here on it, which is how to hold nonviolence through the body. And so, Molly, what you just said, I think, is really, really a huge key, because it's through the act of acknowledging and just knowing and feeling what the experience is, it gives that space where there can be non-reaction. Yeah? And this is tricky, because I think nonviolence through the body doesn't always require non-reaction, correct? Like nonviolence sometimes requires reaction. Anybody? Yeah, you're welcome to chime in, but it's just I'm sort of riffing now, thinking about it. Even nonviolence as a word. So I'm framing, actually, one step here is I'm framing each of these in nonviolence first, right? Which is do no harm, right? So nonviolence of holding lojong or mind training in the body, speech and mind would be nonviolence of body, nonviolence of speech, and nonviolence of mind. Each has a different function, but same intention. But then we can get into conversation on nonviolence if you want, or I can keep moving. Nonviolence is a tricky one within Buddhism, yeah? So somehow, I don't know, I often have a picture in my mind of nonviolence as always like a peacefully sitting monk or something like that. But is that really nonviolence?
No.
I mean, is that the only kind of nonviolence?
No.
Yeah, so what are some other ways? I guess that's what I'm asking, yeah. Protest can be nonviolent, yeah.
The sit-ins and the lunch counters out of Birmingham, that's not violent, but it's active. It's not sitting quietly like a monkey.
What are you going to say?
I mean, I think that the place that it gets complicated, I guess, would be in the defense of someone else. Or, doing something to prevent something from happening that could potentially involve some kind of violence or, aggressive act.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for instance, in the trainings in the Mahayana path, we call them the Bodhisattva vows. One of the vows is that if you, out of like laziness or anger, like spite towards the one you're supposed to defend, you don't do something aggressive to stop harm being done to them. If that needs to be done, then you break your vow.
Really?
It's very interesting. Yeah. So that's what I mean by nonviolence. It depends now what vehicle of Buddhism we're looking at. But in the Mahayana path, because it's primarily interested in transformation, and this kind of transformation also we're talking about lojong, nonviolence kind of takes on a different element. Yeah, because the whole premise is backed by intention. What's the motivation? What's the intention?
The paradox arises in that you're having a nonviolent sit-in, and that provokes a lot of violence in others.
Mm-hmm.
There's a paradox. You are actually fomenting, in a way, the violence of others because of your nonviolence.
It's tricky.
The Gandhi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why it's tricky. That's why I'm kind of. That was the first thing I thought of, because for me personally, maybe I just like to bring up, what's the word? Rouse people up. but I like this word nonviolence in this sense, because we have to, it forces us into different kinds of thinking than we're normally thinking, right? And different kinds of way of looking at our life. I mean, of course, like, I mean, the real simple answer from this perspective, from a Lojong perspective, is what's the intention behind everything? Like I already said, like what's the motivation behind? That's where the true nonviolence lies. But at the same time, you're correct. You know, if we do one thing, then it has another result. So like removing some harmful, aggressive, violent, murderous dictator from power might have a result in creating more suffering for the people that were under him or her, right? So it's very tricky, you know? So again, at the end of the day, I think all we can be responsible for is our own intention and motivation and how we're holding our body. And so I wanted to broaden this out too with body, because I was thinking about how does it feel like when we hold an intention of love in our body and connectedness? I mean, honestly, sometimes when I teach, I don't feel that connected to this is really like TMI, but when I teach, I don't feel as that connected to people. But tonight I felt pretty connected to you all just for some reason. I don't know why, just my mood or whatever. And so I was thinking, like, even the way my body feels changes in relation to that, because we're such deep relational beings, you know, where our bodies are always, you know, are again, I'm becoming new agey now. Our bodies are communicating with each other in lots of ways we're not aware of, you know, consciously, right? So I was thinking about that today, like the body as a non-violent, like when I look at true, like, now again, nobody's perfect. And nobody's like, you know, we like to put people up on a pedestal, and then when we learn about their lives, we see, oh, but they like abused their wife, or this happened. But we can see moments of people, right? We can see moments of men and women who, when they're holding their body fully in nonviolence and love, how that looks. Does it, you know, we can question, does it look prideful? Does it look, how does it look like they have this solid sense of a self there? You see what I'm saying? Or did it loosen for them? Now again, it's tough because some people are full of shit, right? And fakers. But I think we can tell, because again, we're such deeply relational beings. We can feel it in another person's body, even though we might not consciously know it, but we can feel it, right? Okay, moving on. Unless you guys have anything else on that. Yeah.
The monks that catch themselves on fire.
Yeah.
Is that non-violence? Well, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
dispatching with their bodies.
Yeah. It's really tricky. And yeah, and again, like I was saying, I think when I first read that, I think I was confounded by it. And then over the years, as I've come back to those videos and pictures and images, and thought I often reflect on what their motive, like what is their motivation, and that's what's so hard, because it's so hard to know. You know, they might have spoken it beforehand, but even so, we can't see their minds. So, but I often reflect on what I heard some of their motivations were specifically, it was to stop the war, right? And I think it did have an effect, right? Yeah, yeah. One more thing to throw in was I was thinking of like offering space to others through the body. And I was specifically thinking about this more in I don't want to use the word social justice, but a little bit more in that realm of like how systems condition and create barriers and divisions between our bodies, and how to correct that in the nonviolence of how we create space for others with our bodies. And I'm not advocating for any one way, but just thinking on that. Is that, you know, can that be a way to work with nonviolence here through the body, right? I'm a big white Jewish guy, you know, Jewish Italian guy. So for me, not even talking about systemic racism or any of that, but for me, often, I take up a lot of space, like when I'm just on BART. Like I was reflecting on it today, when I cross my legs in one of those seats, nobody can sit next to me, you know? So I was reflecting on it today and thinking, wow, that's pretty selfish. But I kept doing it, you know. But at least the thought came, you know, I'm being a little selfish right now. And of course, when someone comes by, I try to, you know, like squeeze down or something like that. But it made me think a little bit about how I hold my body in the world, as big or small, you know. Often as a, now again, we don't have to get a whole thing about this because it can be also, some people might not agree, but often it's easier for white males to hold themselves as like the loudest voice in the room. I think that's pretty obvious to most of us. So part of maybe this ties in with speech as well, as like maybe hanging back a little bit, not being the first to speak, things like that, offering space to others. So anyways, anybody have any thoughts on it? Maybe I just opened a whole new can of worms for conversation.
Tricky, you've used that word. I mean, if something is tricky,
Yeah.
it's, to me it means it's really hard to find the way through.
Yes.
But it's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
something is tricky, but
Maybe another word is like
Some way
challenging.
through, maybe.
You could say challenging. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think tricky, for me, it implies that there's lots of landmines along the way, right, to watch out for. I don't know when I used it because I'm trying to think back. But yeah, I think I usually mean it in that kind of context. Yeah, we'd say challenging. Yeah.
I thought it might be a Pandora's box, but in holding space for others,
Mm-hmm.
like mindful way. I've been doing a lot of thinking about like what happens when you're holding space for other people and someone gets triggered. I've done a lot of work and reading and research on trauma, and sort of the idea is that like there is a minefield out there for people with trauma, and it's more useful in my experience to not take it as a personal attack when I get triggered. But you see, like especially like on social media, you see a lot of people who are like, trigger warning on the top of a post, right? They're trying deliberately not to trigger other people. And then I think about like one of my big triggers for me is like ridiculous. It's like men over 50 with eczema.
Wow.
Huge trigger for me. I run into that and my heart just starts pounding.
Yeah.
You know, and am I going to spend the rest of my life avoiding men over 60 with eczema? No. You know, am I going to work with that? Yes. And is it their fault? No. And so thinking about that, and I'm getting to the Pandora's box, is I do a lot of work holding space for other people, and had someone really get triggered at a space that I was in, and my response to it was to like help that person calm down, and then be like, no, if we're functioning actually as a community that supports each other, that's holding space for each other, you absolutely should be getting triggered here. That should be happening. Because it's not that matters, it's how you respond to it. And so kind of thinking about violence in that context gets real interesting real fast, because it's kind of like poking people's sore spots unintentionally so that they can heal.
Yeah, I think that'll happen regardless, but what you're saying is really key, I think, because like how do we want to hold our spiritual communities and Buddhist communities? Because in one way, is it okay if I say a few things on that, Molly? Because I thought this was really cool. In one way, like if we're trying to always like coddle each other, does it help us? You know what I mean? No, there's a difference between coddling and actually showing up compassionately and lovingly for somebody. But you know, there's so many things out there of just like trying to soften our experience. So in one way, I really agree with that, Molly, where I think, not deliberately, but of course things are going to come up, and then how do we hold an environment where things can be uncomfortable, and hold that as like, that there can be safety in that, because we can hold a room together knowing that's okay. Like it's okay if someone gets really uncomfortable, right? Or we start to get uncomfortable. That's kind of one thing. No, that's a perfect tie around, because with the body itself in relationship to this, I find that I'm often in those places when I'm needing to transform the situation the most, or start to see it from another person's perspective, I start to become uncomfortable because my vulnerability comes out. It's not fun or nice to think about the suffering of another. It's not, probably some of you are real similar, but like the Philando Castile thing, like that was profoundly I'm still kind of like in just deep sadness around that, because it was so visceral, because he was such a beautiful human being as the stories come out about him. What happened to him was so egregious. So anyways, things like that, there's many things like that every day, right? And so holding those. So anyways, maybe we can bring that into our discussion and conversation on that. Maybe that's other ways to hold nonviolence, is being willing to be with uncomfort as a practice of compassion, yeah? So, so another thing I was saying, and I think Molly already actually touched on it, was this acknowledging and navigating the conditioning of our body in the world with compassion. That was another thing I was thinking about. Of just this acknowledgement first of our own pain, of our own suffering, being willing to feel uncomfort, being willing to bear witness to our own pain, being able to acknowledge that, and then connect it into the conditioning of our body in the world and how it's conditioned. I kind of alluded to this already, but I don't think there's ever been in human history a time when there's not systems of oppression and systems of where the body has to fit into one system or another. So the paradigm we're in now is unique in American, in just America in general, but it's not unique in the sense of there's always systems going on. So part of our practice here is understanding and acknowledging what those conditionings are for us on an individual level, and how we're holding our body based off of those conditionings. I was having a conversation with Enrique Colazo, another Against the Stream teacher, a great guy. We were talking about this today about how the body holds conditioning and how to wake up to that and become more aware of that. Yeah. So I'm just throwing this in, just adding to like ways we can practice, right? So then, in general, from a Buddhist perspective, this is getting more to like more of a traditional perspective, but using our sensory experience as gateways to practice. So getting back to more direct ways of working is whatever our sensory experiences within our body, we can always use it to bring awareness back to those. Bringing mindfulness to those, and through mindfulness, allowing space. So again, mindfulness is another way to create space for ourselves. When we're bearing witness to the pain of ourself, another, or a group of people, or whatever's happening, or a war, whatever's going on. So bringing awareness to our sense gates. So a lot of the times through the practices working with samadhi or concentration and working with vipassana or insight meditation, we're working with practices bringing awareness to our sense gates, right? Or the body itself, and just bringing mindfulness or awareness to that. So that in itself can be a practice tying in this mind training, right? So then we have speech. We don't have a lot of time to talk about speech. Body was the main one I want to talk about, because I think speech and mind, maybe mind isn't that obvious, but I think they're a little bit more obvious. So speech as movement, I was thinking, and speech as sort of the expression of our inner motivation. So that's why I was talking about that intention or motivation as the basis, coming from mind, right? And then speech being the expression of our inner thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. So this is where those become known in sort of it's not a physical form, but in the form of speech to ourselves and others, right? So they start to take on more solidity from a thought of thinking of loving kindness or thinking of cherishing another to like forming that into a form of speech. And that might mean silence sometimes too, right? Just like we're framing this whole thing. And again, applying nonviolence. Nonviolence could be yelling in the street or being silent. It has that whole range, right? So again, holding our speech in the Dharma, right? So usually, traditionally, they talk about Again, going back to this framework of first doing no harm, and then second, trying to benefit, right? So here, speech would be, we could take it into what we call the 10 non-virtues, which we try to avoid. So there's 4 of speech, of avoiding lying, avoiding like slandering others, right? Avoiding gossiping, and avoiding, this is the toughest one. They usually call it like useless speech. And so in Buddhism, a lot of things fall into that category, so it's a tough one. So those are 4 ways that we would, with sila, with ethics, we would practice right speech, or by avoiding those. And this is one way we would hold our speech in the Dharma. That's like more of a traditional way, right? But of course, we can riff on, we don't have a lot of time now, but we could riff on, please throw them out if you want, but lots of ways we can work with speech in the Dharma. And again, going back to what's the motivation, what's the stance? Am I in this for myself, or am I in relation with others and connecting my own well-being in with the well-being of others? And how would I speak from that or not speak?
I really like the idea of the 2 levels. Like, I like it from another perspective, from a recovery perspective as well. But just the first thing is to not do, right? Is to not harm, to not cause harm. I think I like to think about it internally and externally from my own self-sabotage with speech, and then also to other people. And then, like once you're able to do that, then you're always moving towards something. Then you're moving towards non-harming, and you're moving towards being a benefit. Speaking what's loving or kind, or so I like to think about it as I like that separation to have. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to be beneficial and be kind, but I think the first step is to not harm, which I like.
I like it too. But again, I hope this is clear that like this is a practice, right? So that there's a practice within not doing harm. There's a practice within benefiting, right? So it's not like, I think sometimes it's tough because when we don't think of it as a practice, it becomes like a dogma or a morality judgment. Like if we're not feeling, most of the time I don't feel like doing shit, I feel like just watching Orange is the New Black and just, whatever, but I will practice in those moments where I'm not feeling loving or compassionate. I will practice loving, compassionate thoughts or loving, compassionate behavior, right? So it's a practice along this path.
I wonder too, what's interesting to me about it, I think, when someone was talking about trauma, and a lot of times you disassociate from your body and your emotions and all these things, and so they're not aligned. So it's not just about your words being good words, it's just that your words can match your experience, and that it's okay to communicate your experience.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people, like we go about our days and people are talking about all kinds of stuff, and maybe inside they're just feeling a million different things that they're not saying.
Yeah.
You don't always have to say everything you feel, but I do think like when you can bring those things into alignment, it's really powerful. Even if it's not like I'm being nice to you by saying nice things to you, it's just like I'm communicating what's really going on.
Yeah. No, that's great. Like, you're making me think like, what you're implying also, like, even when you're like communicating to someone, hey, I'm overwhelmed right now and I can't like help you or deal with this.
It's better to do that than to just pretend that it's not happening. And then, when things get out of whack, when the 3 aren't, you can only go so long without saying something sometimes, or
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that's part of truth. Yeah. What's up, Ben?
I really like that comment, so thank you. It reminds me of a couple of things. One is basically lying either by saying everything is hunky-dory when it's not, or lying by omission, by sort of never bringing up the tough stuff. They can both cause lots of problems, and it's the only authority I have to say this is my experience with it, which I've had some. And they say like the only way, the only way out is through or something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can't I'm filtering what you said through my own lens. Okay. But I like the idea of hearing the negative voices because they are there. And it's hard to really work with them unless you listen, among other things. After about a year of therapy, my therapist made a comment that I found interesting. He said, Ben, you're very good at sort of speaking the negative voices, like literally saying the words with the negative voices in your head are saying. Maybe every once in a while, though, you can like interrupt and challenge them. So I still do, like, I still am seeing that therapist, and I still do that sometimes, but now I say, okay, I don't want this, for the first pass, I don't want to interrupt them. I just want to hear them out. So I'm gonna talk for a while, and then afterwards you can exercise me. And he does that. It's pretty cool, and I've kind of learned a little bit of the exorcism myself. So yeah, interrupting negative voices works.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I like that. I think I need a little more of that lately. Thank you. Yeah. So we got a few minutes. So I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here. So some things I was coming up with was like, again, like tying in what they were saying. If it's truthful and it's really what's from your heart, again, based off of first the principle of do no harm, then this would be in the category of benefiting, is using our speech to support others. You know, using positive speech to help others when they need it, or and then what would be a deeper method of this is actually wise speech, which is more tricky because wisdom requires a lot more skillfulness than just a positive thing. Because sometimes someone might not need something positive. Like for instance, like I have friends, and I have friends who just mainly relate through sarcasm, right? So if you tell them something positive, they're like, what the fuck, dude? Like, that doesn't make them happy. You know, they're like, why are you my friend? You know, that's like, so there's where wisdom has to come in. So again, it's not about love and light all the time, right? We have to be careful of that, right? So it's tricky because like, we're so vast. Actually, we're so beautiful, you know? There's so many different flavors of human beings. And we each have our individual quirks. So being wise with our speech is kind of adhering or attuning into that too, right? So again, this is after you could see why there's this huge prerequisite of relating to our well-being and being okay with ourselves, right? Because then we really can start to show up for others in this kind of way. Now, I don't think it's like an either or. We can do both at the same time, but I think you all want to get what I'm saying. So for the last one, we have the condition of the mind, or I put mind as the creator or originator, right? So this is a very traditional Buddhist perspective that everything arises from mind, right? In certain suttas of the Buddha, it says this, right? And we can, you know, if we investigate, now, I don't want to get into a conversation of like the scientific thing of whether like there's a brain spark before the thought or whatever. Ooh, I don't want to go there. We don't need to. But the idea here is just that our actions of body and speech are precluded. Is that the right word? What comes before is the mind, right? What comes before is what we're thinking, what we're feeling, our motivations, our aspirations, etc. So we could say in one way everything comes from and starts with the mind from a Buddhist perspective. So obviously, you know, holding the dharma in mind is a big thing. So this is where, you know, we've been talking about this whole time. That's why I'm not spending that much time on it. But this is nonviolence through our thoughts and emotions. And I would say, so again, the practice of awareness or mindfulness, bringing that into our meditation is going to be one of our biggest allies here. Because that's what's creating the space between a thought and an action, right? And that's what's also starting to unstick that. The more we're able to sit with our experience and our thoughts and emotions, the more we're going to be able to unstick from that gluey thing of when a thought comes, having the feeling that it's me or mine, right? So this is what meditation, I don't have to like say this to you, you all know it because you're all meditators, but this is what meditation does for us, right? It's the biggest benefit. And then if we use lojong, like these phrases, or we use a practice like tonglen, we can be sitting on BART. Nobody knows what we're doing, and we're taking in all the suffering of others and offering them all of our happiness. So we can do practices like that too, right? So some of you know Tonglen from when Chandra has done it, right? So, and things like that. Or we can offer metta, right? No one knows, but we're offering them the biggest love, the biggest care, whatever their needs are, trying to fulfill them through the mind, right? And of course, it's not that Buddhism is saying that's how you will feed people. It's a training of one's own mind, right? In love and compassion and nonviolence. So this results in a compassionate mind, in a mind that moves more towards awakening. And why I usually frame this, a lot of my talks, because the less we're preoccupied with the self, the more in line we get with the nature of reality, is from a Buddhist perspective. So of course, the more compassionate we're able to train, if we're able to train more in compassion throughout our day and train in loving kindness, just naturally we're going to have less preoccupation with our own self-interest. And it's not that that doesn't mean we don't feed ourselves or whatever. It just means naturally we reach out towards others. Naturally we have this relational capacity and use that as a means to develop loving kindness and compassion. So then this all leads to developing and working on an integrated mindfulness of body, speech, and mind. So Molly kind of said it earlier, but just this is the notion of bringing all of them together with awareness, right, and training in all these different ways. So maybe what we'll do is we'll wrap up. It's 9, and we'll just sort of take a second to dedicate all the merit from this evening. Or actually, did anybody have, I didn't leave that much time for questions, but I figured we were dialoguing. Anyways, time's up. Too bad. You can email me if you want. So, just in the spirit of what we were talking about all night, we're just going to offer all of the goodness we've cultivated together tonight, even if it was just one moment where something sparked some space in your mind, in your heart. Maybe something you're going to continue to think about or brood on, mull over. So whatever that spark is towards more love, compassion, awakening in ourselves and the world, we're just going to share that with all beings. So you can either do this by just imagining that light going out into the world, like concentric circles, like dropping a rock in a pond, and it just sort of just goes out, circling further and further into bigger and bigger circles, encompassing more and more beings. Or you can just feel that warmth in your heart with the aspiration and wish to share that with all others, and also to continue to cultivate our own awakening. So thank you all so much. I'm here on the 8th. I'm doing a day-long with Eve Ekman. We'll do a day-long together. If you guys feel like coming, I think it's from 10 to 4. And then, other than that, this is what I do full-time. I pretend to be a Dharma teacher. So if you want to help support, if you think it's worthwhile that I should keep doing it, and you want to support it, that's great. I also do one-to-one mentoring work. So you can check out my website. It's just scotttusa.com if you want to see my schedule, blog, all that crap. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.